Well, before we get into the content, I want to do something very important, which is to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, traditional custodians of this land where we're sitting today, their ongoing culture, the contribution they make to life of this city and the region. And we want to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal people, as well as Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to give you the bottom line up front. That's what intelligence officers are expected to do, right? So we're going to talk about how national security customers in the public sector are getting something that they've always asked for, which is they want to go faster and they want it to be more secure. Usually you don't get both. Usually it moves in the opposite direction. So Brian and I are going to discuss that today. Now, what's happening is the things that draw people to use the cloud have been amplified during this last 2 years. They've been amplified by COVID. They've been amplified by world events. They're grabbing headlines, geopolitical events. And they've been amplified by big cybersecurity events that leaders of countries just say are unacceptable. So all the reasons we go to the cloud for scale and for everything else, this is what the national security customers are jumping to. Now, there's also an evolution from the culture that we have of on-prem systems, because why? Well, it's too much of a burden on the public sector workforce to keep them secure. They may be secure, we always say they may be secure on day one, but by day two, they're less secure, and by year two, and then you find year 6, and they're operating on waiver. It's too much to ask people carrying out this important national security mission to also try and keep pace with all of these different systems. And the fact is, now, in the United States, there's been 2 landmark pieces of direction. One was an executive order in May of 2021, which basically says, federal government, civil, you're going to the cloud. Come back and tell us how fast you can get to the cloud. This was motivated in part by the SolarWinds hack, where on-prem agencies in the United States, more than a dozen, were routed. The next thing that happened was a national security directive that said, okay, for national security federal agencies in the United States, you're also going to cloud. Come back and give us the plan. So some of the trends that we're seeing in national security customers across the world fall into these categories. First, we're seeing a lot of application for edge device, for Snowball Edge. Very, very innovative applications on various platforms. And again, they want something very responsive, very fast, and very secure. Also, we are seeing a great deal of interest in mining the information that's publicly available. We call that often open source information. There's a lot of value there. And when I say publicly available, we mean information that a government is not actively protecting from being mined. And the national security customer is finding this is a bigger part of their workload. They're also finding they need the commercial cloud capabilities, the very latest capabilities, to make the most of it. So what's happening is a mix of use of different AWS by national security customers, everything from the commercial regions, the biggest circle there indicating all the features that they have, down to the snow with the least number of running features and services, and then in some cases, dedicated clouds. So this is a picture of how we evolved, AWS evolved in the United States. First, we started in 2006 with the commercial regions. Now, 2006, if you think about that, that's about 100 years ago in digital time. Take the number of years and multiply by an exponent. That's ancient history. Nobody has a device. Nobody in here has a phone from 2006. So next, there was GovCloud. GovCloud, and all these clouds, there's 2 things we're doing. We call it settings and vettings. The security settings and the vetting of who works there based on what the customer wants. So there's GovCloud. Later, the one I was involved in was 2013, a top secret dedicated cloud was delivered to CIA. And CIA runs top secret, as well as 17 other agencies in the United States run their top secret workloads on AWS Cloud. Now, 2013 is still a long time, okay, from now. I mean, we're looking at 10 years. And again, if I do the math digitally, it sounds like, it feels like 100 years. So what's happened is, then we added in 2016 the Secret Cloud, which handles a lot of workloads for the US DoD. So that's the flavors of cloud that have evolved in the United States. But what's happened in the past 2 years for the majority of what we're seeing in national security customers is basically they're using the commercial cloud more and more and more, because here's why. It's just that darn secure. It's never, we do security and increased security every day at AWS. And the capability and security capability we could deliver in the commercial cloud today far exceeds what was delivered in 2013 to host CIA's top secret network, in addition to 17 other agencies in the USIC. So another way to look at it is we're going from, very rapidly from different flavors, 4 flavors of cloud here, to really countries going to 2 flavors. They're making extensive use of the commercial regions because, like I said, that's where a lot of the mission is. They can get on it early. They can start developing AI and ML tools are being developed on the low side, on the commercial region. It happens very quickly. Then information as necessary is ported up to a secret or top secret region. And now for the big reveal of how we're pulling this off, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Brian.
Thanks, Sean. So Sean set us up nicely to move and talk about how we're going to actually move classified workloads into potentially into the commercial cloud. What's important really is, and this is an introductory session, so really want to step back and really set a foundation for cloud adoption, because no customer is just going to jump and put their most classified or their most highly secure and sensitive workload inside AWS. So I'm going to step backwards. I'm going to do a little bit of foundation work. I'm going to go through that very quickly and jump in a little bit more detail. So hopefully everybody in the room is aware, but security in the cloud is a shared responsibility. Security below the waterline is AWS's responsibility, and security above the waterline is your responsibility. So when you build an application inside AWS, you need to make sure you put the appropriate security controls on that application to meet your security requirements. And then customers come back and ask us regularly, hey, prove you're doing what you're supposed to be doing below that waterline. And that's where our global, all the third-party attestations and security accreditations that happen and occur against AWS regions take place and validate what we're doing today. AWS is maintaining over 2,600 security controls today, but they're only validated locally or regionally according to the particular compliance regime that is interested, or the locality that's assessing those local regions. But we're, generically speaking, rolling those security controls out on a global basis. So as we onboard a new region, as we onboard a new customer base, AWS is rolling out, and customers are getting the benefits of those new security controls. Then as we step up the stack, customers then are asking us, hey, how do we actually meet our own obligations? How do we build our applications in AWS to meet the security requirements that we need to do to meet that compliance regime? And a lot of different security services here. AWS has all these services to help you bring, I'm caught up in my mic there, has all these security services to help you bring and meet your compliance requirements on the customer side of the responsibility model. And I'll just highlight a couple. Things like AWS CloudTrail, providing control plane, management plane, visibility into all the operations that are happening inside your cloud tenancy, whether it's your administrators, your end users, or your applications taking activity. There's a complete record of all that activity, something that's hard to do in an on-premises environment across the plethora of different vendors that might be providing services to your organization. VPC flow logs, a capability of providing visibility into your traffic flows. But AWS flow logs are unsampled, byte-accurate records of your traffic inside AWS, providing you very clear, detailed visibility of what's happening from a traffic flow, what traffic's moving between your different workloads inside your environment. Again, something that's typically from an on-premises basis, done at a sampled basis rather than unsampled. We use that to do our billing, so we have to make sure that's accurate. And then services like AWS Key Management Service, enabling a service that's integrated with all the AWS services that store data at rest. And through a single click, customers can then take and encrypt their data at high levels of assurance to provide that extra level of comfort that AWS doesn't have access to your data. And in the cloud, AWS does not look at or view or have access to a customer's data. And I'll just close off with guard duty here. The number one service that every customer should absolutely have turned on. Guard duty is cloud native intrusion detection service. It provides, rather than just providing intrusion detection IDS capabilities at the edge of your network, it's cloud aware, cloud native, and it is able to look across your AWS environment and provide very high quality, low noise indicators of compromise inside your environment, and allow you to very quickly, and if there's ever an indicator of an incident, strongly encourage customers to jump on that immediately. So it's a critical service as customers move forward and adopt AWS. But we've got a lot of different security services here, in addition to all the different business services and analytical services that AWS has to offer. So a lot of Lego blocks to help you build that outcome and meet your compliance requirements. Customers are then coming back to us and saying, we really don't know necessarily how do we put these Lego block pieces together in a fashion or a manner that allows us to meet our compliance requirements. So AWS, has the Trusted Secure Enclave Sensitive Edition. It's a reference architecture. It's a very opinionated and prescriptive reference architecture that is designed based on experience with our AWS customers to meet public sector compliance requirements, around the world. We've been working with customers, internationally. We've been incorporating our lessons learned back into the reference architecture and solution to make sure we're delivering on the outcomes that a lot of customers are looking for. So rather than struggling to figure out and learn how to put all those Lego blocks together, there's an open source solution coupled with the reference architecture to allow you to automate the deployment of these technical security controls and the architecture to meet those compliance outcomes. And why that's important, so from that perspective, and what are we really talking about here? We're deploying a standardized landing zone or reference architecture on the customer side of the responsibility model to help you meet your compliance and security obligations, really at this particular sensitive edition level from a protected level of workload. And I want to stress, as you move your workloads to the cloud, as you validate your trust in AWS and the security capabilities of AWS, we're really looking at moving more and more sensitive workloads into AWS, and getting experience at the sensitive level or the protected level is absolutely important for customers as they move up to that next level of workload inside AWS. So layering on another set of security controls, moving to a stacked security assessment and authorization process. You're already inheriting the security controls of the cloud. A lot of our customers are now assessing that landing zone such that every time they deploy a new application, they have a smaller subset of security controls that they need to deploy and deliver every time they build and launch a new application inside AWS. The application is then inheriting the common infrastructure security controls, whether it's guard duty being automatically turned on and accessible for your workloads or accounts, or those VPC flow log type capabilities are available and accessible. Some customers might say, why is this important? So AWS typically, from a public sector perspective, or from a commercial perspective, has this cloud adoption curve where our customers start with experimentation, they move into foundations, and then they do their serious cloud adoption. This curve actually switches from a public sector perspective. Our public sector customers are typically building their foundations before they've done their experimentation. The problem with that is, if you haven't experimented, you don't understand necessarily how to tweak the knobs and dials. You don't understand the implications of making certain design decisions. So building that secure foundation and putting the compliance in place ends up being very difficult. So one of the reasons why we went and built that sensitive edition of the Trusted Secure Enclave is to allow customers to get that foundation dropped in place And as they learn and experiment in the cloud, they can tweak the knobs and dials to customize it for their own environment, but gain that base foundation and base compliance and enable them to get their cloud journey going and moving forward. As always, if you talk to anybody from AWS, we always try to work backwards from our customers. It isn't just that we developed a solution, because Brian thought that we should have this solution. Our customers were asking us to help them, securely put together these Lego boxes or these Lego pieces and get that foundation in place. So we work backwards from the end business users, the developers, the application owners. We worked across different security and compliance frameworks and working with security regulators and depending on the organization, central IT organizations. And we agilely iterated on the architecture, bringing the best practices from an AWS perspective, from a industry perspective, ensuring that our customers continued to get the agility and innovation. That developer wasn't boxed in and constrained in what they were able to do. They could continue to innovate and deliver on the value that their end customers were expecting and delivering that outcome at the end of the day. This slide, very busy, represents that reference architecture. At the end of the day, it looks a lot like a lot of other AWS multi-account reference architectures. And the key is we've taken AWS's standardized reference architectures and we've layered on some extra components that are very typical of or requirements of a lot of compliance regimes and that we're seeing our public sector customers asking for and looking for. So from this architecture perspective, we're providing strong segregation between applications, between stages in the SDLC cycle. We're using different AWS accounts being every AWS customer starts with an AWS account, a private cloud running inside AWS's public cloud environment. And so we're providing customer-like segregation between the stages or the cycles of the SDLC cycle. We're providing that strong segregation of duties by centralizing some of those networking components such that the networking team can manage the routes and control the networking flows while giving the developer the ability to have full administrative access inside that developer account without having the ability to alter some of the networking flows and the security controls around the networking. We've provided that same segregation of duties from an IaaS ingress-egress perspective. Centralized ingress-egress is a common security requirement, so enabling those flows to be properly inspected and have the segregation of duties and strong blast radius surrounding those particular boxes. And as these accounts are rolled out and deployed, automating, turning on all the guardrails and security services that are required to meet those security requirements, including providing centralized access from a security tooling perspective. So your SOC or your security operations team can get access to all the security consoles and have visibility into the security posture of the environment, as well as doing the same from an operations account, your cloud operations team, giving your operations team visibility into the metrics and performance of those workloads. Building on that, strong set of policies being put in place that enforce from a preventative control perspective, guardrails such that a developer with full administrative access cannot bypass those guardrails and is forced to work within the constraints of those compliance regimes, with the guardrails increasing as you promote or move up through the SDLC cycle to production. So this is something we've been doing for a couple of years. It's enabled customers in a number of different countries around the world to be able to move forward, and it initiated out of some work we were doing in Canada. That's the sensitive edition. What we're really trying to do with this sensitive edition of the AWS Trusted Secure Enclave is shift our customers' focus, our partners' focus away from building foundations, away from building infrastructure, and really moving up the stack and starting to focus on delivering the functionality, the business functionality, the business value, why you're really here and using cloud in the first place. We want our customers shifting their focus rather than learning to tweak and turn the knobs. We want them learning to deal with incident response in the cloud. We want them moving up and dealing and learning to manage, to take care of their cloud operations. We don't want them to just do that in an arbitrary basis. We want to use, and we're leveraging the experience that has been gained across a plethora of other AWS customers with that prescriptive and opinionated reference architecture and all the learnings that we've had across our numerous customers around the world to accelerate and elevate the environment and the automated deployment of the security controls that help you meet those compliance requirements from that perspective. And really, we're seeing customers reducing their time to getting that foundation in place from upwards. We've seen customers that have taken over a year to get those guardrails in place or that basic foundation before they are able to move forward with adopting cloud to getting that deployed and laid down in days. And it's not just about getting the guardrails down on day one. It's about every time you onboard a new workload, every time you onboard a new set of users, every time you onboard a new set of AWS accounts, making sure that the guardrails are consistently deployed in a prescriptive manner so that you have that level of confidence that you have your compliant foundation in place, not just on that day one, but through day 2, day 10, and day n in your environment. So really looking to make sure we're establishing and improving that compliant posture such that you can have that level of comfort initially at the protected level, moving your workloads into AWS. So as we move up into the more exciting stuff that Sean was alluding to, we really want customers having that extra level of confidence, that extra level of comfort that they can move that next level of workload into AWS. And I like to equate it to a safety deposit box. Safety deposit box is stored in a vault that only has a few people that can get access to it. You go in the vault. You have a key. The bank has a key. It takes your key to open that safety deposit box. The bank staff leaves, and you put whatever materials in that safety deposit box you want. Could be cash, could be personal documents, it could be jewelry or whatever collectibles you might have, but the bank has no visibility into what's happening in that box. So we just want to give customers, as they move up to this next level of workload, that extra level of confidence. We want to layer on extra controls in the architecture that are appropriate for that next level of workload to provide that comfort that absolutely nobody has access into that environment or workload. So when we start drilling down into what is the highly sensitive edition of the Trusted Secure Enclave, we're really talking about building an enclave or an environment inside AWS that layers on additional layers of security controls on top of that sensitive edition architecture to elevate the security, to provide extra levels of comfort such that customers feel comfortable putting that highly sensitive workload inside AWS up to potentially secret level workloads. One of the important things to consider as we move up in data classifications, as we're moving into more and more sensitive workloads and putting them inside AWS, it's important to recognize that you should only be applying the level of security controls to the workload that's appropriate to that workload. Because as we move up to this highly sensitive edition, we're layering on some pretty constraining security controls to get that extra level of confidence and that extra level of comfort from you as a customer. It's going to come at the expense of some agility and innovation to be able to deliver on some of those requirements. But we don't want to constrain your protected level workloads to some of these constraints. But it does provide the benefits of you not having to wait upwards of 5 years to build or get a dedicated cloud region built locally for your customer base, which there's a high possibility, because when AWS builds those dedicated regions, the business justification is very high, and quite often it doesn't exist to build them. So and those dedicated regions typically have a smaller number of services. So we're trying to unlock the value of the commercial cloud, allow you to put your highly sensitive workloads in the AWS commercial cloud, initially at the expense of losing a little bit of innovation agility, but unlocking the basic core services like auto scaling and quick time to value and some of those basic services. And agilely over time, as we gain your confidence and comfort with some of those lower level services, starting to onboard on an agile manner more and more services based on customer demand to meet the specific requirements of that next level application or workload. So what are we really talking about here as we talk about this highly sensitive edition of the Trusted Secure Enclave? One of the things we're doing in this case, I talked about, AWS manages over 2,600 security controls today. One of the things is we would pull those into scope of some of the local compliance regimes for evaluation, such that there's the comfort that we're doing all these extra things in the cloud that haven't been evaluated yet are helping protect you based on what we're doing elsewhere in the world. So putting those into scope of some evaluation to provide that extra level of comfort, and potentially working with some of the local security regulators and agencies to bring additional security controls that are critical to providing that extra level of comfort, moving some of those workloads into AWS. Additionally, as we look at this and as we move up, I already stated we're still going to build on top of that sensitive edition. We're not going to ask you to start again. You want to use that base foundation, that initial protected compliance foundation you laid down, and then we're going to layer on that highly sensitive edition set of additional security controls. We're going to layer on, the extra customer side boxes to limit in and create that safety deposit box feel from your application perspective, so that you have that level of comfort that you're staying inside that tightly bounded box, and there's a lot less room for that application to move around, or a lot more comfort that the data is going to stay inside that tightly scoped box. So part of the thing some of the things that we're going to layer on as we're looking at that HSE and some of the extra controls we're going to lay down and put in place includes things like putting a stricter set of policies in place. Those policies would include things like limiting the instances that can be launched inside that environment to AWS Nitro-only instances. So a lot of people aren't aware, but AWS does build its own servers. We also build our own silicon. And the way AWS Nitro instances work, and all modern EC2 instances are based on the AWS Nitro system. But the way that works is we've offloaded the hypervisor and all our control plane logic onto AWS custom silicon. So that's now moved into hardware. It's no longer part of or running on that x86 motherboard. It's no longer running on the CPU or processor that your workload or customer workloads are running on. All the AWS stuff is running off on our own hardware and on our own silicon. So we've got a level of hardware isolation between the AWS control plane and customer workloads. When that Nitro system boots up, the Nitro system holds the x86 motherboard in wait state. It interrogates the motherboard. It makes sure that the BIOS, the BIOS and all the different firmware that exists on that motherboard are all validated to be cryptographically in the state that we expect them to be. And then when we're comfortable with the posture of that hardware, we allow that server to boot. So, providing a very strong level of comfort that we know and understand the posture of our, the hosts that are running your workloads, and providing the isolation that our code is not running on the same hardware or the same CPU as your code. And because of things like that and the fact that we dedicate cores to customers, we dedicate cache to customers, we don't share those. AWS traditionally hasn't been impacted by a lot of the CPU timing and cache vulnerabilities that have existed. Additionally, building on that, when we move the hypervisor and the control plane software onto hardware, we narrowed it down and we moved to a finely scoped set of API calls that was available. So a traditional hypervisor, there's a console, there's root access, people can get onto those boxes. In the case of the AWS Nitro system, we got rid of root access. We redesigned it so there was no operator access to the box. So AWS Nitro hosts have no ability, even if somebody desired, even if we had a lawful order, there's no ability to actually, for an AWS employee to access or gain, get the data off of that EC2 host. The APIs that exist are APIs like start instance, stop instance. There is no API that says, copy data out. So that we simply did not create an API to allow that capability. So again, in that 10 years of Silicon innovation as we innovated and built the Nitro system, really designing it from the ground up to make sure that there was that level of confidence and comfort that we don't want humans touching data. We don't want anybody getting access to that data. So really scoping down and locking in the capabilities there from a Nitro perspective. Additionally, Nitro instances, when they talk to each other, provide line rate anonymizing encryption between each other. So, and because we've offloaded that into hardware, we've launched instances today that have up to 800 gigabits per second of line rate encryption and ability to communicate between each other. So just another layer of abstracting. And typically, when you're layering on encryption, that encryption does still leave metadata visible. Because we've done it at that hardware layer and the way we've implemented it, that data is anonymized, and the typical metadata that's available to customers is not available in this particular case. Additionally, as we build up and move into this area, what we're doing and how we're modifying that original sensitive edition architecture to move up to the highly sensitive edition is we're leveraging some additional internationally recognized patterns that are already being used by governments around the world to process classified materials using commercial technology or transmit data over unclassified networks. So we're trying to, rather than reinvent the wheel and have lengthy discussions about things that are maybe difficult for customers to change the way they're thinking, we're trying to also layer on and leverage patterns that are already being used from a commercial technology perspective to enable the use of processing and transmitting of classified material in AWS Cloud. And some of those patterns include using multiple layers of nested encryption from different vendors' technology to provide that extra level of confidence that AWS or nobody has access to that data. Because the technologies are across multiple vendors, if there's a flaw or a vulnerability in any particular vendor's product, we've got that multiple layers of vendors, so it's very unlikely that the holes or flaws in those products line up. In addition to that, layering on those patterns and allowing for multi-layered encryption, both from an at-rest perspective or a in-transit or in-flight perspective, just providing those extra level of capabilities. If at any point in time a customer is concerned about the posture of their environment, they can very quickly pull access to the keys, and the architecture is using a positive key control architecture, so the keys would be maintained in an on-premises based fashion, such that customer can pull access, they can cut the network link, and crypto shred that enclave at a multi-layered shredding type capability. In addition to that, moving up to that next layer, it's obviously important that not only are the technical security controls in place, most security and compliance regimes have a strong component of operational, organizational, policy-based security controls. So we're putting together a number of different offerings to help customers mature their security operations center, their incident response teams, to help with progressing through the assessment to get the authority to operate in place to operate at some of these higher levels. From that perspective, I think it's important to just reiterate, we're really layering on and leveraging a defense in depth approach, something that every security professional really relies on, layering on layer after layer of extra defense mechanisms. If there's a flaw, if there's an issue, if something's configured wrong, we've got those extra layers of defense that will protect the workload or application and make sure that there isn't an issue or incident. We're building in things like pervasive and proactive threat and boundary testing to test out and feel out and mathematically prove the boundaries of that enclave or that box, so that there's extra levels of comfort and we can automate the shutdown of the enclave should something mathematically prove out incorrectly. I mentioned we're doing positive encryption, positive key control, and hosting keys on premises. We're also looking at positive identity control in this particular case as well. So if at any point in time confidence in the enclave is lost, simply cutting the network connection or access to the IDP and the encryption keys provides that extra level of comfort in getting the environment back into a state that it can't be leveraged in a negative manner. And at the end of the day, we're really looking to just accelerate that ability for customers, for you, to get your workloads running in AWS in an authorized manner. So we're very serious about figuring out how do we elevate, what's the next thing we need to do to help you feel comfortable moving that next more secure workload into AWS. So, encouraging customers, start with your unclassified workloads, do your protected workloads, and continually iterate and evolve, and pick that protected plus workload, pick the tactical secret workload, and slowly work up to a point where you feel comfortable. We've proven our capability, we've proven the security controls are in place, and you've gained your team's matured enough to be able to deal with security and cloud operations, and we'll just get classified workloads running inside AWS. And at that, there are, you can scan these QR codes from a learning perspective, lots of on-demand learning available from AWS, or exam and certification assistance and guides. And I'd like to thank you for spending your time learning a little bit more about AWS today. But I think it's important that you do complete your session surveys, provide feedback such that we can improve sessions and deliver something better next year around. So thank you very much, everybody.